Welcome, Lisa Schader. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to have you on today. For everybody listening in, Lisa and I have been talking for just a second, right? Just a second, not like 20 minutes.
Yes.
I was trying to. I couldn't stop talking to you. So now we're finally getting started for everyone to actually hear. Lisa is a financial educator, a financial coach, and has her Master of Accounting. She has worked in accounting as well and started her career there. Today, we are very lucky to have her on the in the world on social media, creating content that's very compelling and geared toward helping women manage their own money. So I am thankful that you're here. I will kick us off by saying I know I shared this with you earlier, but I came across one of your posts that was it's at the top of your link or your Instagram page, so anybody can find it there. But Lisa's basically like dressed in a gown that she found and is singing a song that goes something like, I understood the assignment. And she talks about everything that her family has sacrificed in a really fun, cute way to get to where she is today financially. So I'll just set the stage with that in case anybody wants to go look at it and find her on Instagram. And I felt so seen because it is such a sacrifice, and not many women put it out there in the world, A, and B, do it as well and as fun as you did. So let me just stop there and say, Lisa, how did you get into this social media creating world? How did that all start? You can go back as far as you like.
Yeah. So our journey started really back, and I say our because I mean my husband, because I got married super young. We met in college, we got married in college, and we were still doing our undergrads. We both were in separate but in the same school 5-year programs. So mine was accounting and master's accounting with an emphasis in tax, and his was in information systems, but it was in business school. And so we got to this is like life changing. You know how life hinges on a moment? This was a huge hinge moment for our life. We chose to take an elective together that was personal finance. And I was just going back through my email because actually this professor, I tagged him on LinkedIn when I was talking about how this story is in J.L. Collins' new book about pathfinders, like people finding their way to financial independence. And I talk about, like, the title of my story is life-changing advice. And someone was like, oh, you do give life-changing advice. I'm like, no, I'm not talking about my advice. I'm talking about the advice this professor gave us. And like I said, this was not part of my program. This is not something that people who get accounting degrees get. And I realized that when I graduated and saw people not doing this. But anyway, the life-changing advice he gave us was to wait to upgrade our lifestyle and invest instead. And right, because we are used to living super cheap as like broke college students, and he's like, this is what most people are going to do. They're going to get their first job, and this is not to shame like anyone, because this is the norm.
Of course.
And we all want to, a time machine. So if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, I wish I would have done this, you can do this at any time. Like, it's when it's called lifestyle inflation, when our income increases and we just increase our lifestyle by that amount or sometimes more. And so at any point when you decide you want to accelerate your investing journey, and we lucked out to get that advice early, you slow down your lifestyle, rather than constantly increasing it, you increase your investments first. And so that's what we did. So we graduated from college, and we kept our lifestyle just like as low key as we could. And that's the sacrifices I talk about, because people like see where we are now and they're just like, oh, well, must be nice. But I'm like, oh no, we did insane things that normal people would not. But I was super motivated, and this is why I teach what I do, is because I wasn't just doing it to make sacrifices. I knew what we were doing. I had a plan. And that's what I do now. I teach people how to build their long-term plan. So it doesn't just feel like sad sacrifices. It's actually it's called like value-based budgeting, where you're putting money towards things that matter. And so when I was, choosing to take public transportation or living in a much smaller house or driving older cars than we could technically, quote, afford, it was because I was investing in our financial independence, and I could see, like what a big difference that would make down the road. So our professor suggested 10 years, like just chill it out. Like, not saying you don't have to take it to the extremes we did, but he was like, it will change your life if you can just slow down for 10 years and put that towards investing instead. And so I, meanwhile, like, graduated and saw people borrowing from their 401ks and all this stuff in my field, right? So these are other accountants. And that's when I realized, okay, not everyone took this class. Not everyone knows. And it was things also like teaching about like pulling your credit report to save on interest when you're buying a home, like, stuff like just little things that I had learned that were like
Yeah.
life changing. And so I realized, I'm like, oh, this information's not out there. And that was when I had my first son. That's when mommy blogging was just taking over. And that's really the only, and the mommy blogs that were finance related were very much couponing and frugality, which is great.
Yeah.
But they were not
Sure.
pairing it. They weren't, like, let's say they were spending all this hours and hours of their life couponing, but they were not contributing to their 401ks enough to get their employer match, which is literally just thousands of money, like thousands of free dollars they could have had that they were missing out on. And it was not to shame, they just didn't know. And so my first blog I started with my friend who had graduated in the accounting program with me, who was also a mom, who was like, oh my gosh, we need to get this information out there. And that's how I started my first financial blog. And it was so funny because no one was talking about this back then. There was I didn't see any other financial blogs, and definitely not women or moms. And so we'd have to do this thing where every other post was like a craft or something that could take off on Pinterest. And then we'd have to like try to like sneak financial information into it to be like, so I had this, like, I made our headboard because we were, we didn't have money left over to like buy new things. So if like, I literally was like, we didn't after I was making our contributions because, I would just make it work. So I would like lure people in. It got like 1 million views, this DIY headboard post. And then I was like, also, are you saving for retirement? Do you know what a Roth IRA was? And so when I saw, like, it was so silly, but I was like, whatever I have to do to like get people, like, no one cared. And so that was the first blog. And then when I had like my second and third son, I was like super overwhelmed and like shut that down because I had a lot of like shame around working. Like, if I could go back in time, I would have never stopped working. Like, that would have been better for terrible postpartum anxiety, depression. Like, so it took until I was done having kids and realizing, like, I want to do that. Like, I kind of went through a whole career exploration to be like, do I want to go back to accounting? I don't think so, because at this point we weren't dependent on my income and hadn't, because we'd slowed everything down and just constantly invested. We weren't dependent on my income. And so I was like, what do I want to do? And it was this. I'm like, I want to keep doing this. And by that, like, I hadn't even created an Instagram account when I did my first thing. So I started over and I created my Instagram account and didn't know anything I was doing. And once again, was just like trying to figure out how to get people to care about this stuff. And that's how like stuff like that video came about. So it's very like silly. And
that video is great.
Yes. But
a lot of your, your content's great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So
I think,
but yeah. Oh, I was going to say our professor said 10 years. I did the math because once I started coaching, I realized the power of tracking your net worth. And when I did track my own, we hit 1 million almost exactly 10 years after we decided to slow down lifestyle
amazing
and invest instead. And that's when I was like, and so I hate like putting it out there, but I'm like, people need to know that this is possible for anyone. And it's just the way to do it is a lot more boring than they want it to be, And so, that's kind of how we got here.
That's awesome. So I don't think that since we've started this podcast, this is really funny. We have really taken the 4% rule, for granted. We have not yet on this podcast, to my knowledge, I might be mistaken, had someone explain the 4% rule, so that, and it might be a good time to do that so people understand what you're talking about. If, I think most people probably do, but would you mind explaining what your professor taught you, or what, maybe you just want to explain the 4% rule, but where this all comes from?
Yeah. So basically the I think most important thing to realize is that retirement is not something that happens at an age. It's something that happens when you have enough investments, you can live off the investments alone. And actually, retirement, you have to separate from financial independence. Because so many people hear, like, oh, well, I don't want to retire early. And I'm like, that's cool. You can do this
Mhm.
at any pace you want, but realizing
Right.
it's not something that happens automatically. And it's not something that can only happen when you are in your, late 60s. So financial independence is when you have enough investments you can take out. And so the 4% rule is based on the Trinity study, and it's been out there for a while. It's more of a guideline, but they said for a 30-year retirement, which is average, they found that they ran against all the scenarios of like the history of the stock market, and they found that in 95% of scenarios you could withdraw 4% of your portfolio and not run out of money before you die for a 30-year
Mhm.
retirement. So if you're trying to do a 40 or 50-year retirement, it's a slightly lower percentage, which, by the way, the study was done originally in the late 90s, but people have redone it with updated because it's like, oh, the Great Recession, all these things happened since then, and it still holds true. So the math behind financial independence for a 30-year retirement is your annual expenses times 25. And people get all upset because they're
Mhm.
like, oh, what about this factor, this factor, this factor? And I'm like, okay, this is not a contract. Like, this is not a legally binding number.
Right.
It's napkin math to help you realize, like, oh my gosh, it's a big number.
Mhm.
And you can't save your way to that number. You have to invest, and you need
Yes.
the compound interest. And that's why I am trying to get more and more people to understand the power of compound interest, and especially women, because statistically, 80% of women are single when they die, whether it's they never got married, whether they're divorced, whether they're widowed. And so a
Yeah.
lot of women want to outsource this to their partner, and specifically the investing and financial side.
Yeah.
The majority of women feel confident managing the budget, but when you break in, so Fidelity did a study and they found 14% of women said they, quote, know a lot about investing when asked that. 14%. And so that's when I was like, I
Mhm.
could not stop talking about it, because
Yes.
it's not that hard. Like, it's like anything where it's like the first time you hear about it, it's like, oh, I have no idea what you're saying, but you need that context. And
Yeah.
so, but the thing is like the compound interest is everything. And so what I
Mhm.
talk about sometimes is the fact that,
Start
because
young for any
yes, yeah,
listeners out there
yeah,
who are young.
or if you're not young, start now. Because some people will be like, oh my gosh, I'm
That's
already
right.
40, I'm already 50.
Right.
I'm like, you still have decades, first of all, and you need growth in retirement. So, like, whenever you're doing this, start this now. But I like to remind, like, women, like, even a lot of moms, because my brand is Money Fit Moms, they feel so removed from the finances if they're not, quote, like the primary breadwinner. And what I like to point out is that for the majority, like, since we had kids, my husband has been more of the primary breadwinner because we have 3 kids, and it was very difficult to try to like manage that. And ultimately, I became the primary caregiver. But if you do the math
Mhm.
on investing, let's say you invest $500 a month for 40 years and you're looking at a 7% average return, like 40 years later, over 80% of that wealth will be from the growth, which means I like to say my husband's the primary breadwinner. Like, yes, we needed
Amazing.
that income, but because I'm the one who made sure that we were investing it,
Mhm.
I call myself the primary wealth builder. And that's why I'm like, this is so crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
I
let's
love
get
that.
everyone on board. And it's amazing how someone can go from not knowing anything to feeling super confident. And that's my thing, is I just
Yeah.
like want to teach enough to get people excited about it and realize that you are not that far away from becoming a confident investor. It just takes some some time, so that's why I
Yeah.
love your podcast,
In your
because
class.
it's a great
Yeah.
way. Yeah, I do have a class that I teach. I have a free class. The first one's in January 11th. I don't know when this will run, but I hope to do it every few months. So if you find me on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, there should be a link to this class. But yeah, I'm like, let's spread the word. Let's make this cool. And
Yes.
luckily, I found my people. There's lots of people talking about it. And it's
Mhm.
just they look different. They have different communities that they're speaking to. And that's why I love this community, is we're so invested in empowering whoever, identifies with us. And if there's, you know what I
Hmm.
mean, I'm just like, find your person who you
Right.
align with, because I'm like, I'm not trying to convince anyone they need to work with me or whatever. I'm like, just wherever you want to get your information from, just keep going back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is incredibly true that because I, like yourself, started this journey in my 20s. And at the time, I came across, and I think most people would tell the same exact story. Mr. Money Mustache is who I came across. And he was sort of the first person speaking the gospels of the 4% rule, so to speak, or at least doing so in a really eloquent way, a very compelling way. And I was sold in, but he certainly didn't look like me. I was a 20-year-old girl at the time, I guess 23. But it was really men everywhere. And that is not a problem. Like, so thankful for these men. They taught me everything I knew at the time. It was like Warren Buffett, Mr. Money Mustache, J.L. Collins. But there weren't many, there were not, if any. Apparently you were out there and I didn't find you, which makes me really sad. But there, it was not, it was men teaching me what to do. And I am so glad that that is changing with women like yourself. Because it's going to be both, right? We can learn from everybody, but our situation, our unique role as women is a little bit different depending on the journey that we want to take. And certainly as a mom, if you decide to take that journey and that's the one that you go on, that looks very, very different. And I think to
100%.
your point, I have always had the energy for that investing. So I'm thankful that you're out there, but I would love to talk a little bit about what it looks like. So when women first started coming to you, has that demographic, I guess maybe more like not their demographic as much as their viewpoint, has it changed? And are there more women coming to you today than maybe 5 years ago, 8 years ago?
I think there's definitely more people about, I mean, part of that I think is we had this huge bear market for the last like 10 years, and there were a
Yep.
lot of millionaires made, and people kind of were like, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, I was trying, but all you wanted to hear about were like
Yeah.
DIY projects. And so I think
Yes.
people, you know, I mean, I hate that it took hitting, you know, a million net worth or whatever it was for people to like care and like perk up their ears. And I tell my husband,
Yeah.
I'm like, could we please just hit the, because we're what's called coast five, meaning we don't need to save
Yeah.
anymore for retirement to be able to retire in our 60s. And that number is moving progressively down. And by our calculations, we should be a few years away from total financial independence. And I keep trying to accelerate that because I'm
Congratulations.
like, husband, if we could do this sooner, people will listen more. Whereas, you know what I
It's
mean? I'm
true,
like,
which is a
and I hate
shame.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's
Yeah.
like this weird thing where I don't
Yeah.
actually love talking about our net worth or whatever, but people want to see like why they should care about Roth IRAs, like why they
Right.
should care that they can invest in their health savings account. And I'm like, so I try to talk about
Hmm.
enough of the results to see like, this is why you should care. But yeah, definitely the demographics have changed. I love, and which by the way, yes, I'm a mom, but I 100% support the child free by choice women. When I'll meet some at a conference, I'm like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, can I follow you? I love options for women and to feel empowered to make the decision that's right for them.
Yes.
And that's totally my goal with education
Yep.
is I'm like, you do not need to retire early. You do not need to do X, Y, or Z. What I want you to do is feel it's choice. Like that, like people have those bad like connotations with money. Money's evil. And I love these quotes that it's like, money won't solve all your problems, but it will solve your money problems. Like the truth is that the more
Yeah.
right that things have grown, the more free I feel to do what I like, spend the
Hmm.
time how I want, to be generous with others. And also, I think an important point that I love that's out there is that it's not all or nothing. It's not complete financial independence. We're looking at the possibility of, I call it building a runway of not being dependent on my husband's income for a time for like
Yeah.
career exploration, where it's not that
Right.
we have to be totally financial independent. So it's called, if you haven't talked about this, FU money, which means you are not dependent on your employer's whims to decide what you want to do with your career and your life, because
Mhm.
you can build these like I just call it a runway where you can live off your investments for a time, even if you're not being totally financially dependent forever. And like, yes, I'll come back to work, but it just like, it creates all these pathways. And anyway, so yeah, just realizing it is possible. It's possible no matter when you start, if you start later, and the sooner you start, no matter when you start, the cheaper it is to buy your financial independence. So yeah, it's just the most expensive thing you will ever buy.
Yeah.
And we're used
Yep.
to seeing large amounts for like buying a house. Financial independence is expensive, and the price goes up every year you delay saving for it. So I'm like, no matter where you are, let's
Yeah.
start now, because it's just the nature of compounding, right? And
Yeah.
so you can go at your own pace, but
Right.
please start so that you can choose to go slower if you want, or you know what I mean? Like, and I'm a big fan of
Mm-hmm.
automation. Like, this doesn't have to be hard. You have to learn enough that you feel confident making contributions and understanding that you don't just need to contribute. You make sure you're buying the underlying investments, because that's a very common mistake. But once you automate it, like, you can kind of set it and forget it, and it comes out like any other bill that you have set on auto pay. And that's my goal, is to get people as automated, especially because my target audience is very busy and already just completely to the max
Mm-hmm.
with their obligations. And I'm like, I am not trying to be that person who's like, you need to dedicate 10 hours a week to this. I'm like, no, like, come
Yeah.
learn until you feel confident enough to do this, or work with me if you just feel like you're not going to do it, unless someone holds your hand. Do whatever you need to do to get
Right.
started on this, and then let's
Yeah.
set it, and then let's move on with our lives and spend. Like, the nice thing is, when you have your plan built and you know exactly how much you need to be on track for your goals, I'm like, I am not that person who's going to tell you to save every dollar. I'm going to say, save as much as you need to be able to be financially
Mm-hmm.
independent when you want to be, and then spend the rest of your time and money however you want and feel so great about it and guilt free. I took 14 trips this year and I felt zero guilt about
So cool.
anything, because that's my financial
Good for
priorities, but
you.
I'm not sacrificing
Right.
my financial independence. And that's like my dream, whatever it is, whatever your, everyone has their own financial priorities. Like, you don't need to adopt mine,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm not that person who's going to tell you to not spend money ever. I'm like, let's figure out how much you need to set aside and
Mm-hmm.
then enjoy the rest of your life, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, when women come to you, are they coming from a place like, is it all sorts of different backgrounds, or has something gone wrong that ends up leading them to you, where they need to get their money in order? Are they coming across Mr. Money Mustache and going, and yourself, and going, I want to do this. I want to make this happen for myself. Like, what are some of the reasons that lead them to you? And then I'm a little bit curious about, some of the big changes that you've been able to see that they do accomplish and make happen for their
Yes.
families.
Yeah. So I've worked with a lot of people who are in a lot of difficult situations, especially with like partnerships. So people who are separated, people who are divorced, people who are widowed. And it takes sometimes
Mhm.
things going very south to be like, I've got to figure this out. And what I love about
Mhm.
what I do is where they start and where they end could not be more different. And you think like, oh, it's money. Truth be told, like, the job that, like, the thing I almost thought about doing before I started Money Fit Moms was going back and getting another master's degree in family therapy so that I could be a therapist, because having
Mhm.
had postpartum, I know how powerful it is to be able to talk to people and reframe those mindsets. And I was at the open house and thinking, a lot of mental health struggles are from stress. And here I was ready to throw all my, not only financial knowledge, but also passion out the window to focus
Yeah.
on this. And P.S., I love therapy. Like, that would have been a valid choice. But I realized I could help so many people with the knowledge that I already had. And that's why I started to,
Mhm.
and actually, financial therapist is a thing. It's a regulated term. So I am not that.
Yeah.
But a lot of my work is, yes, we're like getting in the deep dives, and there's numbers and stuff, but a lot of it is reframing the mindsets and like getting rid of shame. I always say I work in a shame-free
Mhm.
zone, and that's not to like just make people feel good. It's the truth. Like, this information is not out there. You didn't miss a day in class. You didn't fail to do something that you were
Yeah.
told to do. You were never told this information. And that's why I'm like, it's crazy, because it's so life-changing. And it can be so
Yes.
simple, like The Simple Path to Wealth, the name of Jill Collins' first book. It's not
Yes.
easy
Yeah.
when you're having to make adjustments to your lifestyle if you're not on track for your goals. But you
Mhm.
adjust to that in about 2 or 3 months. We're like have amazing brains where we like reset. But then what's cool is like it's not when you understand this long-term plan building, it doesn't feel sad. It feels empowering. And so I saw people reach a new place where they feel like before they felt like I'm not in control of my money, I don't know where it goes, to they become the boss of their money. They see their money as like little soldiers that they're deploying for their goals. And it
That's beautiful.
totally changes, yeah, the dynamic of the power. And I'm married and very like happily so, but I say financial education and empowerment will improve a good relationship and save you from a bad one. And that's a huge aim of
Mhm.
why I
Mhm.
like to work with women, is because um like trigger warning, but financial abuse occurs in almost 100%, like 98, 99% of other types of abuse cases. And I bring it up, and whenever I post
Mhm.
about financial abuse, the saves and the shares are crazy. And it gets shared by a bunch of organizations and other accounts that work with vulnerable
Yeah.
women, because sadly, like we need money to live. And so it becomes a means of control. And so that's why I talk about it enough for people to be able to see the signs. That's not to say that if you are not the one managing your money, that you are in a financially abusive situation. But I tell people about the signs, like if when you start to try to regain control and knowledge about your money, you get pushback, you need to be aware that that is a potentially dangerous situation and you may need some more
Yeah.
help. In most cases, that's not what's going on. They just, you know what I mean? It takes a process to be able to get access to accounts and things like that. But that's why I'm like, this knowledge is not just like, oh, get rich, like live,
Yeah.
live your best life. Like, yes, I love that, but it's also just opens up your world and protects your relationship. And learning about this, like, I get a lot of questions because I focus on moms. How do I teach my kids? If you don't have kids, how do I teach my niece and nephew?
Mhm.
How do I teach the next generation? Or I'm a teacher, like, and
Yeah.
the best way is to understand and become a confident investor yourself, because more and more
Mhm.
states are getting a class, and it's like a class in the high school curriculum, which is great. But the most
Mhm.
valuable information is when you can feed this information to like young people at the just right time. So the conversations I have that
Yeah.
are effective with my kids are always organic, things that just pop up, and I can just like put one little thing here or there, and it's mind blowing how quickly they can pick up on it. They're super smart and they remember it like forever when you find the right
Mhm.
times to do this. And so a lot of people have asked, I think they want me to create a class that they can just like put on for their kids and be like, done. I don't need to teach them about money. And like I
Yeah.
could do that, but I don't think that would be the most effective. Like if anything else, if anything, it would be something that they watch together. And if you take my class, you
Sure.
can watch it with your kids for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just like, it is, learning about finances is not optional, I guess is what I'm saying. Like everyone needs
Right.
to know this, and the sooner you learn it, the more money you can save potentially by not like,
Mhm.
I would argue a lot of people don't need a financial advisor. Not that there's anything wrong with, like a certified financial planner. They're
Sure.
a huge benefit, but they're it's based in a system that has changed significantly with technology and new
Mhm.
investment options. Um, but it's still
Yeah.
running under the old rules and fees. And so the more you can learn and make a choice that's right for you based on, right? I'm just
Mhm.
like, oh, I show people like the difference in fees. And we're talking about a half a
Yeah.
million dollar thing. So I'm like, yes, feel free to keep
Yeah.
couponing. But also I have this information that's like a $500,000 outcome difference. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So can you I think that the financial advisor topic is tough. And a lot of these money topics are tough because people are coming at them from all different backgrounds and knowledge base. And it's hard also if you've been having a financial advisor to find out that that potentially was you know, wasn't the best
Well, and not all
choice.
financial advisors are equal, like
Right.
100%. And that's why I'm like, let's learn so you can, see how to pick out the good ones. And when I talk about financial advisors and fees, I have 3 different lines I'm showing. I'm showing them like, okay, this is if you're managing it yourself or using, a lower cost option. I'm like, here's if you're
Mhm.
paying someone. I'm like, but here's if you don't invest at all. So if working with a financial advisor is what's going to help you invest, you're going to be way, way, way better
Absolutely.
off. So this is not
Right.
like it's a like a very individual decision. My thing is I'm like, I want if they need a financial advisor, I want to be the person who helps them be like, oh, I need help, or just
Yep.
getting the information about understanding what investing management is and what their options are.
Yes.
And it's not all
Yeah.
or nothing. Like I like to help people realize that when you start working with a financial advisor and they ask you they tell you, here's how you transfer over all your accounts. That is not how like, you don't have to do that. That's something they would love to
Mhm.
manage all of your money, but you get to pick
Yeah.
what they manage for you. And so I had that experience of being told, transfer over your Roth IRA because your husband wants to invest this account through me. And I just said no. There's
Mm-mm.
no pushback because
Yeah.
I know, and I'm guessing that almost never happens that someone just says no to them.
No.
And I've had so many
Yeah.
experiences of being on calls with financial professionals, bad experiences of assuming I'm just the little woman who they can talk down to, that I've started leading the conversations with my credentials
Mhm.
because I got
Mhm.
so livid, whatever, being talked down to. But
Mhm.
here's the thing. This is not like
Yeah.
oh, she has a master's of accounting thing. This is anyone can do this. So one of my favorite stories is I have a friend who's in the she's I think hygienist or dental assistant. I should know this. Probably hygienist. So she right, that's her training and education. She follows me, and I did a post about 529 plans, which are tax advantage
Mhm.
education investing accounts. And I talked about the new rules that starting in 2024 allow rolling over to a Roth IRA for your kids, which basically, like, if you just went cross-eyed, basically it just created an option so you don't have to be as worried about over contributing, because that was a concern before. And I just, I made it in like a fun video format. And so she got the information, and her brother-in-law, who was a CFP, was having a conversation about 529 plans, and she's like, oh, well, but now there's the new option to be able to roll over. And he's like, no, that's not a thing. And so she was like, sat there and Googled it and pulled it up and showed him. And
How funny.
he's like, that must be
Yeah.
new. And it was new. It just came out with Secure
It is
2.0.
new. Yeah.
And that's like my
Yep.
favorite story ever, because that's exactly what I want. Is
Mhm.
I just want to give enough, like, it's not that like watching a few of my videos you'll know everything. I just want to give you enough context to have the confidence to push back and dig deeper at the
Yes.
right times
Yes.
in ways that will change your life. Like, I just like, my
Yep.
goal is financial confidence and clarity.
There are a lot more women like you and I out there in the world, but it's not as easy to find. And money is something that you don't talk about, it's taboo. And all of that combines to create a situation where when you are committed to investing at that level and going really hard at it, it can feel very private because it's not appropriate to talk about it. It is not as common. This is what I've told Matt before. It
Right.
feels like it's not as common as I want to go run a marathon, and you're talking about it all the time, you're telling people, and people know that's what you're going after. This goal can be, and I hope this is changing. Like, that's why you and I are
Right.
here talking about this. This movement, the financial independence, retire early movement, has come a long way. I'm glad that we're here, but we still have a lot of work to do, because talking about it is not okay. It is very uncomfortable, and it does not feel like something that you can feel like people know that you're doing that. Like, I don't go out in the world and like bring up in conversation, yeah, life's, this has been tough. Like maybe 5 years ago when I'm like making a ton of sacrifices, and we still do. We still drive the same
Yeah.
cars that we drove 10 years ago. And
Yeah.
that will probably change next year, but that's 10 years. And we don't go, yeah, that's why we're doing this, because unless it's like it would have to be different. Whereas I would bring up easily, yeah, I'm training for a marathon, or I'm training for, an ultra, or whatever it may be. It is so different. And because of that, it can feel so alone. And it
Right.
also can feel like, oh, this is silly what I'm doing. It doesn't make sense, because you don't have people validating you in public and having a conversation that, is acceptable. So I like that we're doing this, but I wonder, do you feel that way when you talk to women, that women feel that as well?
Yes.
Or is that changing?
Yeah. No, yeah, 100%. And that's why, and I realized I was not like super explicit about how we built our wealth because I realized I'm like, if you follow me, you know, because I talk about it all the time. Basic
Right.
tax advantaged accounts, 401k, Roth IRA. Eventually, like way down the line, I realized you can invest your health savings account. Because, like I said, I'm also was figuring out this information for myself. And like that's it. Like the key really was that our savings rate was so high and just basic low fee index funds. Like I also didn't know about the cost of having an advisor. So we kind of like danced in between having an advisor or not having an advisor. Like our keys to
Yeah.
success though was that we saved as much as we could and we didn't stop and we didn't panic or sell because I understood
Yep.
that when you invest for decades, and I was never going to let a down in the market stop me from like continuing to invest. But yeah, sorry to answer your question. It's 100% like a taboo topic, and it's anything else like with exposure therapy, where the more you talk about it, the less awkward
Yes.
it seems. And if you feel bad talking about it, let me tell you kind of the motivation to talk about money more. And this is like sad, and it's not that like it's a conspiracy theory, but basically not talking about money benefits the people who already have it and disadvantages the people who don't. So you can feel like
Mm-hmm.
a strong, like powerful person by bringing this stuff up. It's not because you're trying to like make people feel weird, but it's the same thing with mental health. Like I talk about my postpartum anxiety and depression and seeing a therapist and seeing a doctor and all the things that I do because I know that by talking about it, I'm removing the shame and making people realize like, oh, there's other people who are dealing with this and it's okay to talk about. And it's the exact same with money.
Yes.
So when I went to the FinCon it's called Money Nerds Unite conference. I found my people because I was worried that if I went, it would be all white dudes talking about, like thin bros,
Yeah.
like finance bros. And I would just like hate that energy and just back away slowly. I had a photography business at the time because it was something I could manage easily, like with the kids.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I think I want to go more full time into Money Fit Moms, but I'm going to wait till after this conference because I may hate everyone there and want to go the other way wedding. And when I went, I was blown away by how lovely these people were, how in it they
Mm-hmm.
were for the right reasons, because generally speaking, the finance people have figured it out for themselves. And the reason why they're doing it is because they realize how simple it can be and they want to spread the word. So they're not like I made, I think, $3 an hour this year doing Money Fit Moms. I'm not doing it for the money. I'm definitely doing it for the passion. And so
Yeah.
what I love was seeing like people of color, women, people from
Yes.
the queer community, like so many different people who are in these communities who are like, let's get this information to them because there's a huge, like, I don't know if you've seen these charts where it's like by demographic for every dollar this person earns, like where it goes. And so they're like, we need to close this wealth gap. And so anything that's like, hey, let's get the information out there. And when people are trying to like keep it, they call it like gatekeeping, right? It's
Yeah.
hurting the people who need the information. And so what I love is that when I'm talking to these people, we put all our information out there in terms of like, this is what I'm doing that works. Like they
Yeah.
were so generous. And
It's awesome.
I have a
Yeah.
friend, he has over 100,000 followers on TikTok. And I was like curious because he had like a big hit. I'm like, how much did you make from this last month? I'm like, sorry, that's super rude. He's like, oh no, not rude at all. And he'll
Yeah.
just like lay it out for me
Tell
because
them.
he's
Yeah.
like, that's so
It's great.
weird to like hold back on information. Like
Yeah.
you're out there trying to like make a difference. Why would I hold back on information that could be potentially helpful? So that's what I love
Yeah.
about the financial education community. Like I love Personal Finance Club. I got to meet, do you follow them? I got to meet
Yes, I do.
Jeremy
Yep.
at FinCon and
That's so cool.
went into full fangirl mode. I will
Of course.
never talk
As
to him
one
ever
should.
again because I embarrassed
Yeah.
myself. But the reason why I'm such a fan of the brand, and also and Shane, who work with him as well, I'm like, I love what you guys do so much because you can tell they have they're just there to help people. And there's so many good
Yeah.
accounts like that where they're like, there's a million other things we could do. We're doing this because it will, I
Yeah.
think, have the greatest good in society to get this information out there. So yeah, I don't hold back. It's a lot
That's great.
sometimes.
Yeah, oh, I love it. I think it's amazing. It's so inspiring. So I want to hit on two more things. One is when you're working with couples, and maybe even just women individually, but of course, this is if you're married or you have a partner of any sort, it normally is something that you need to deal with together.
Yeah.
What does it look like when these two lovely people are not on the same page? What advice do you have that you see make the biggest impact on helping them?
Yes. So I like number one, tracking the net worth has a huge effect. So I worked with a couple, and one was really motivated to pay off debt, and the other one felt like, what's the point? This is just something that I'll have forever and will pay off eventually. And it was because they were only looking at the cash accounts. And so why would you just constantly be getting rid of your money is what it looks like if you're only looking at cash. So when we started tracking net worth, and I'm like, okay, let's just, spend a few months trying to put, and then, so that's a big one, is tracking your net worth and then knowing what your goal is, even if not everyone's like totally on board, like just enough that be like, okay, if what goal makes sense, and I have a financial order of operations of what I think makes sense. And I'm very much like, your money, your decision,
Right.
but financially, this is what makes the most sense when you're looking at what is, I say work smarter, not harder, in terms
Right.
of what's the fastest way to build your net worth based on your current situation. And so I'm like, if you go after this goal next, this is going to have the greatest effect in building your net worth. So we spent 5 months, and they did not even budget. And I say that because I love budgeting, but it is not a black and white situation. Tracking your net worth, if I had to choose between a couple only budgeting and tracking their net worth, I would choose net worth, because if they're not already budgeting, it's possible it's going to be very difficult to get them on board. But tracking your net worth, in addition to helping you pay off debt and invest, also helps you live within your means, because you see, like, the problem with budgeting, which I like, it's great, but when all you're doing is tracking your expenses and you have a quote bad month where you spent more than you earned, and then you're just looking at the next month and it's like it disappeared. You're in a whole new month. But when
Yes.
you're tracking your net worth, it doesn't disappear when you spend
Right.
more, right? That has a permanent negative effect.
Yeah.
Like, it takes you down from where you otherwise would have been. So we spent 5 months not budgeting, just tracking net worth and knowing what their goal is, and knowing what your goal. So I compare it to, if you are wandering through a forest and then, 20 years later, it's like, oh, you could have been this was a 5K race. Did you not know?
Yes.
Right.
You could have
And
been
so,
heading somewhere.
yes,
Yeah.
you
As
didn't
opposed to
know.
nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't
Yeah.
even know there was a destination, let alone how to get there. So I'm like, knowing
Right.
what your goal is gets you twice as fast, just because you have a path. That's not to say you can't slow down and enjoy the journey,
Yeah.
but just knowing where you're going and when you want to get there makes a huge difference. So all we
Yeah.
did was track their net worth and know what their goal is. So then when something came in miscellaneous, they knew exactly where to put it, and
Mm-hmm.
their net worth went up crazy amounts in those 5
Wow.
months. And that was the
Yeah.
fire they needed to see, like, oh, this is like, this actually
Yes.
works. And if you're just looking at their cash accounts, because we're tracking their net worth, we just basically tracking your net worth goes through, whether you're doing it on a spreadsheet or in an app, you're
Yeah.
going through and seeing what all the total of your accounts equals. So if you look at their cash accounts, it's like nothing was happening. But if you look at their net worth, it went up huge amount. And then it gave them the motivation to they paid off all their credit card debt, which felt awesome and was so motivating. And so that, I think, is the biggest thing, is having these tools that become sort of the mediator in the thing, but also having a money meeting and meeting regularly. And that, because you can tell I love analogies, I compare it to, because finances are a touchy topic. They can be emotionally
Mm-hmm.
charged. We feel attacked if we're the breadwinner and we feel like there's financial trouble. We feel like we're not earning enough. If we're the household manager and there's financial trouble, we feel like we're being told we're overspending, when in reality, it's just like how it is. And so if you're meeting regularly, it creates a safe space where you're come prepared. So it's the difference between if you get tackled in a football game and it still may hurt, but you're prepared, as opposed to if you're just walking through Costco, buying your Honey Nut Cheerios, and all of a sudden someone tackles you to the ground. You are just not prepared, and you're much more likely to get hurt because you don't have pads on. You aren't prepared for the hit. And so just setting aside a time and place. If you're on my email list, I send a reminder for the first Sunday of the month to update your net worth and have your money meeting. And I send a little agenda that you can work through. And so it's not that like there's miraculous like change overnight, but creating a safe space, having a way to track your progress, and knowing what your goal is like they found 80 something% of people who work with a financial coach accomplish their goals faster. And it's just these things of like knowing what you're doing. And I don't think everyone needs to work with a financial coach. And that's why I'm like, let me give you the tools in case you don't, for whatever reason, want to work with someone. I'm like, I can't help everyone anyway. So I'm like, let's just get it on.
Right.
Having a money meeting, tracking your net worth, and knowing what your goal is will take you there.
Makes a big difference.
Sure.
Yeah. I think I've heard you talk about shared accounts and having a fun money account. So, and I loved hearing this because I think, a lot of people are aware that when you are growing wealth together, there are a lot of benefits to that and it can grow faster. But when it comes to, do you have one account? Do you have two accounts? Everybody's sort of a little different. Like Matt and my husband and I have always kept everything together. And then we just sort of like, we have our own accounts, but then we pull whatever we need out and just use what we need. And we're always very conservative about it. But I love the way that you do it. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah. So I have what I would call a like 95% shared. And that's a term my friend Ray, I'm trying to remember her handle. I think it's Ray Michelle Peters. That's actually what she called it. 95% shared, which by the way, if you want to have your finances separate, that may be a gut decision that you feel safe doing. That is not to say that you need to combine your finances. This is what we did. When we got married, we were broke. And so this was like, this was just how we've always done it. Yeah. But 100% shared is stressful because we are humans with different priorities. And even though our big financial goals, we're mostly on the same page. And I say mostly because we even have different ideas about how fast we want to retire or what we want to invest in. And that's okay. And literally we sometimes don't agree and we'll just like split the difference, even though it's shared. I'm like, I really want to invest it this way and I want to invest it this way. We'll just say, okay, like this is all our money, but we're splitting. I'm like, that's right. However you make it work. But the key is, and the thing that I think everyone should do, whether or not the rest of your stuff is combined, is have fun money accounts, because it will settle, I'll say 80% of your arguments. And so we have always had separate fun money. And by fun money, I mean money that is completely ours to spend on whatever you want without accountability, other than like, in our house in California, we live in small spaces. And so I'm like, it can't take up a lot of space. It can't be detrimental to the health of our children, whatever. But basically, he's an early adopter of technology. I love traveling. And he spends more on clothes actually than I do, but I spend more on like going out with friends. And so when we were broke, it was like $5 a month. Like that was what we could afford. Mm-hmm. Now it's pretty hefty. Like we now are high income and it's a lot of money because it's what we can afford. We're still on track for our goals.
Sure.
And it's so fun because we can do crazy things with it and there's no guilt or stress. So my husband did a trip he climbed Kilimanjaro and he was with a group that wanted to do it like the kind of fancy way. They have this like huge support group. Yeah. It's a huge revenue generator for Tanzania. And so it was super expensive. Yeah. Like I would not spend that much on that trip. That being said, I went to Europe twice this year. Still less than the cost of his one trip to Kilimanjaro. But I'm like, there's no, like, we're not even looking because we keep it tracked. There's a lot of ways you can do it. We use YNAB. You need a budget, the app that puts everything. It's basically like a digital envelope system. So ours is just tracked that way. But if you want, you can use separate accounts and it just automatically you know what I mean? Like if you don't want to
Mhm.
budget, where it's just like you have separate cards that you use for your fun money purchases, and you just have a certain amount that you transfer there every month. And so my husband spends his more regularly. I usually save, and and this is what a nerd I am. I got to the point where I did not, like COVID, I couldn't travel. I started investing my fun money because there was like, I still live on less than I
Yeah.
earn. So, but it like
Yeah.
just made my trips to Europe so great because I'm like, oh, worst case scenario, if I go crazy, I can sell some
Right.
of my investments. I have like a huge slush fund for my fun money now, which,
Yeah.
a budget within my budget. I'm a nerd, but there's a lot of simple ways to do it.
Budget
But
within my
I
budget. Love that.
100% whether or not your finances are shared, I totally recommend fun money so you can be different and
Right.
still, yeah,
Yeah.
share your goals.
I love that. We are just now getting to the point where next year will probably look very different than the last 15 years have looked. So it's an exciting time. And I try to remind myself, I have actually had a spending habit. It's just been buying BTSAX.
Yes.
And now I'm going to move the spending habit and we're going to buy some fun stuff. So
Yeah.
wish me
Yes.
luck
I love it.
because it
Yeah.
feels weird. But then I started trying to change the way I'm thinking about
Well,
it.
that's actually why I love budgeting, because it gives me permission to spend and feel great about it.
Yes.
Because I had that like
Yeah.
scarcity mindset of like, it was easier to save everything. And when I didn't
Right.
have to save everything in March, it was hard to transition. And so having that, this is the exact amount of money that I can spend on
Yep.
whatever is like very freeing to me.
Right. Right. I think that's awesome. We hit on so much. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we maybe didn't discuss or anything coming up where, yeah.
No, yeah. If you just like, I hope this has been helpful and not triggered any like feelings of guilt. Like anything that we've talked about is something that you can totally learn and feel confident about.
Mhm.
You didn't, like I said, you didn't miss a day of school. You can become a confident investor. Anyone can become a confident investor. It just takes time. And the best time to plant a tree is now. So if you are starting from a place of like, oh, I wish I'd known this 10 years ago, know that literally everyone says that, no matter
Mhm.
what age they are. So you're not behind. Right? Like start today. If you want more stuff from me, you can follow me, Money Fit Moms. If I'm not your person, there's, ask me, be like, here's what I'm like, who should I follow? Like, I'm not
You'll
offended.
you know them
If
all.
I'm not the person you want to follow, I have lots of friends that I'm happy to refer you to. But yeah, if you want to, you can come to my free investing class, or I have a free build your 1 million plan that you can sign up for. And those links are on my profile.
Yeah.
But you can do this and you can become a confident investor.
I love it. I'm so thankful that you're out there. Your content is so fun, so inspiring. It's really refreshing to see. And I do think I will say out loud, isn't it amazing that I've been doing this since I was like 20 years old? I'm going to be 40 next year. So that is a long time. And when I finally came across you, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I think that's pretty impressive. Maybe you're a sign that the movement is sort of evolving. I'm joking because it's been evolving and changing for a
Yes.
really long
Yeah,
time.
for
Of course
sure.
it has. But we still have a long way to go. And I'm thankful for people like you. I have a daughter and I had a son and then didn't have my daughter for 5 years. So I was a boy mom for a really long time. And I will tell you, it is different thinking about the little girls, especially because I have one who's like, I want to have 5 babies. And I'm like, what? I run a business and I handle the family's finances because I love it. And I could not believe it. And who knows, she's 5. So that could
Yeah.
change, but it does make you change the way you're thinking. Like I'm thinking about, educating her around finances, because I have to be thinking for her like anybody. You don't know where you're going to end up.
Right.
I could end up, I don't think we're going to divorce. I adore my husband. We're really happily married, but you don't know what the future holds and you
Yeah.
need to be ready. And I want her to feel ready. And certainly if you're going to have 5 children, then that looks a lot different. You need to have a big impact on your family's finances, in my opinion. Just knowing what I've known, where I stand today, I want her to feel empowered. So I'm glad that there are people out there like you who are doing that work for us.
Oh, thank you. I need the kind words because I kind of hate social media and only do it because when people find me and I want them to say, "Oh, a friend referred me," I'm like, "How'd you find me?" And they're like, "Instagram," and I'm like, "Oh," because the troll comments and the
Yeah.
comments like, "Stop trying to pretend to be an influencer." I'm like, "Trust me, no one feels more cringy about this stuff than I do." But I wrote an elaborate blog post about contributing a Roth IRA. No one read it. I
Mm-hmm.
made one video and I had 3 people open their Roth
There you
IRA.
go.
So I'm
Yep.
like,
If this
I
is what it
can't,
takes,
this,
and it
I will do
does.
whatever it takes to get
Yes.
people on board. So I'm
Yeah.
glad you appreciate it and
Yeah.
just know if it's cringy, I'm totally with you. So,
It's not,
but
and I
I'll do
love
my
it.
best.
I think it's important, and I'm glad that you're doing it. So yes, go
Awesome.
to Money Fit Moms. Hopefully we'll have you back on sometime. And yes, I forgot to mention this. Lisa's story is in JL Collins' new book. We interviewed him in the episode before Lisa, which was really fun. And pick up a copy. I think anywhere right now you can get a copy of
Yeah.
Pathfinders. It's
It's so good, by
wonderful.
the
Yeah,
way. I'm
yeah.
like reading it now and I'm like, this is so good. And I'm
It's
not,
so
not just
good.
because we're in it, it's so good.
It's really just
I
because we're
think
in it.
if you're new, no, seriously though, if you're new, I would read Pathfinders first.
Yeah.
100%. I would read it first. And only read Simple Path to Wealth if you feel like you need to, because I feel like what people need is the
The
mentality
stories
as
are
much
so
as
inspiring.
they're
Yeah.
so inspiring. So yeah, I
Yeah.
totally recommend it.
Yep. You'll find yourself in there somewhere. You'd be hard pressed not to, because there's just so many stories in there. Yeah.
Completely.
Okay. Well,
Awesome.
thank you,
Well,
Lisa.
thank you
Have a
so
wonderful
much.
day.
Thank you, you
Bye.
too. Bye bye.